I'm glad to be joined in Shanghai by Chen Hong, Executive Director of the Asia Pacific Center at East China Normal University, and in Kuala Lumpur, Peter Chen, Deputy Director of the Institute of China Studies from the University of Malaya. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us. Important trip made by the Chinese Premier to New Zealand, Australia, and also Malaysia. This is coming at a very complex geopolitical time. And to you, Mr. Chen, you've been doing studies about New Zealand and Australia for decades. Tell us more about how much of common ground can China seek with its premier's visit to these two countries?
Yes, I totally agree that Premier Li Qiang's visit to both Australia and New Zealand are very important. I think actually the most important common ground for China and also both Australia and New Zealand is the economic and trade relations, which are the most important part of the bilateral relations among these three countries. China's economic growth has been instrumental to the collective development of countries in this region, or in particular, of course, to Australia and New Zealand. I believe Premier Li Qiang's visit will be a catalyst to further and closer collaboration between China and Australia and New Zealand. So as we know that actually the Asia-Pacific region is facing a lot of challenges, and in this particular case, of course, we need more common interests, more common grounds, in spite of differences, of course, and to seek the mutual good.
Mr. Chan, go to you about Malaysia. How much of development in terms of both trade and also discussions in other areas can happen during this trip?
It's actually the 50th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic ties between the two countries. I think Premier Li Qiang and Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim will take this opportunity to again affirm the strong and steady ties that the two countries had despite the challenges that we had. Malaysia will take over the chairmanship of ASEAN next year, and I think Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim will want to confide in Premier Li Qiang on how the China-Malaysia relationship could be a positive impact in the wider region.
Now, these three countries are very different one from another, and so is the bilateral relations between China and these three countries. So why don't we focus on them one by one, as they are unique in their own way? To you, Mr. Chen, New Zealand. China is New Zealand's largest export market, and meanwhile, we see politically changing in New Zealand. For example, the government is now majority the central right. But it has not have much impact on the trade landscape. Meanwhile, there's also the geopolitics and the so-called security issue that is hanging in the air. So how well a balance do you think both sides can tip this time during Chinese Premier's trip on these all very important components of the relationship?
Yes, New Zealand has been in the lead of China's relations with the Western countries. China and New Zealand relations have created many firsts. So it is noteworthy that Premier Li Qiang chooses to visit New Zealand, first, before Australia, which indicates the high esteem China places on New Zealand. So since, as you mentioned, late last year, there has been a new government in Wellington. So this time it will be the first time for the Chinese Premier and also New Zealand Prime Minister Luxon to meet each other. So I think during the visit, the two leaders will strive to work together to make conditions for their bilateral relations to develop to a new height in spite of their differences and also the complexities of their geopolitical scenarios. And 2024 is the 10th anniversary of the comprehensive strategic partnership between China and New Zealand. So in the spirit of this comprehensive strategic partnership, Premier Li's visit will be a catalyst for more dynamic development for the bilateral relations. For trade, of course, New Zealand is China's closer trade partner. China is New Zealand's biggest trade partner. So in this term, apart from their traditional areas where New Zealand exports, agricultural, husbandry, produces to China, there are new areas like creative industry, like movie industry, like healthcare. These are the new areas that both countries can, develop, and also people-to-people relations. For example, Premier Li Qiang in Wellington just announced visa-free access for New Zealanders to visit China. So these are all the very favorable conditions for both sides to be in closer contact, which of course will be further promote trade relations.
I would love to know how the Chinese scholar like you assess the kind of discussions or balance that New Zealand should keep in terms of looking at its trade, looking at its security?
Yeah, New Zealand has been sticking to its independence and also sovereignty in its foreign policies, in spite of the interference and also pressures from, for example, Washington, from other Western countries. That has been, molding or shaping its very unique position in the Asia Pacific, which is actually quite independent in its decision making, also including, of course, its China policies. So as you were mentioning, actually, for example, like New Zealand has been considering the participation of the Pillar 2 of the AUKUS. But of course, China resolutely opposes any formation of a military clique, which is actually a military clique targeting China. So New Zealand, of course, governments, including think tankers and various circles, needs this political wisdom, this kind of prudence to make sound judgments to handle the increasingly complex situations in the Asia Pacific. The most important target is to ensure and ascertain the stability and peace. That is, of course, of critical importance to the economic soundness of the region and, of course, to New Zealand.
Right. Australia, of course, politically, it's a different way, exactly different from the case of New Zealand. It's an administration coming into power that is more constructive in its interactions on relations with China in different fields. Of course, there's also pressure coming from Washington, as well as many countries would face geopolitically. But we see that China and Australia's trade relations have been warming up. Earlier tariffs put on against each other's now has been partly reduced. So how will the Premier's visit make this progress sustainable?
I think bilateral relations between China and Australia are now back on the right track. China and Australia have this annual leaders dialogue mechanism, which has been a good platform for the two sides to exchange views and also seek mutual understanding at the highest level. Due to their sabotage, by the previous Morrison, administration in Canberra, this mechanism was disrupted. And after Albanese, as you mentioned, visited China last year, Premier Qiang is now visiting Australia. So this is a clear sign of the resumption of the two-way exchanges at various levels, at the people-to-people level, at the business level, at the government level, and now at the top level. So I think the bilateral relations between our two countries are now generally stabilized and on the track of improvements.
We see Malaysia has been working with China on many regional mechanisms. So how do you think, Mr. Chen, that this time, this visit, going to elevate the levels of discussion and bring to fruit some of the already existing progress?
I think they will continue to move towards a higher level of cooperations between China and Malaysia, not only in terms of strengthening the bilateral relations, but also the regional stability. As I mentioned, next year, Malaysia will take over the chairmanship of ASEAN. We really see BRI 2.0 as critical for Malaysia's transition to Industrial Revolution 4.0. And we see Premier Qiang coming in, basically reinforcing China's commitment to help Malaysia sort of continue our transformation into the industrial age.
Mr. Chen, so how do you see China is looking at Malaysia as both an important economy in the Asia-Pacific region and also its key role among the ASEAN members?
I think actually this time, Premier Qiang placed Malaysia, in his itinerary is very important because it connects the three dots, Malaysia, New Zealand, and also Australia, because these three countries are very important, decisively important in the Asia-Pacific region. New Zealand and Malaysia, these are actually adopting a very independent foreign policy, while both three, all these three countries are actually close trade partners, economic partners with China. So the United States, the U.S.-led West has been imposing its wills on other countries to maintain and strengthen the American or the Western, hegemony. So in many cases, countries in particular, developing countries like Malaysia have been trying to manipulate it as chess pieces to serve the American interest and also strategy. So for countries like Malaysia, it is quite important to defend their national interest, by defending their sovereignty. So China has been working, for example, with Malaysia, with other countries, Indonesia, and also, in particular to support the local, infrastructure developments as a way to achieve mutual benefits. And these are actually, I think, very important to promote regional economic stability and also prosperity.
We see very rapid interactions between China, Beijing, and also several other capitals, whether it is in Europe or in Asia and beyond recently. We all know for the latter half of the year, there's going to be a US presidential election. By the time of November, we hope we know who will be in the White House. And there might be some dramatic changes of policies if there is a change of personnel in the White House. So how do you see these ever increasing numbers of interactions between Beijing and other capitals are preparing for the uncertainties?
But in the midst of all these changes, there is one constant, I think, and that constant is China. China seems to have maintained a kind of a very steady, consistent position. The BRI, for example, has been for 10 years, and it's going to be another 10 years. And China has constantly maintained consistent policies of open engagement with all. And I think Malaysia recognizes that. Malaysia's position has always been very open to want to engage all the stakeholders in the region. And China understood Malaysia's needs to engage with everyone and not excluding anyone. However, some of our peers, our partners in the region or in the extra-regional powers may not really understand ASEAN's position. So we appreciate China in that regard. We see China as a constant in this period of change.
We see there are also dramatic changes in terms of trade and geopolitics impact on trade. With the latest case study of the electronic vehicles being exerted with 100% tariffs by the United States, despite its violation of international trade rules. And secondly, now we see the European Union in Brussels trying to slam about 15 to about 40% different rate of tariffs on China-produced electronic vehicles, despite different voices among many capitals who are members of the European Union. So how do you see China will be a unifying force and will be a force that would bring both big and small economic players on level playing field and be able to create momentum still for regional and international trade?
I think actually, in spite of the anti-globalization trend, imposed by the United States and also some other Western countries or blocs, but still, the theme of the world, the world scenario is still, peace and stability and also development. So all these actually need a constant, as Professor Qiang was mentioning, China is a constant. So as a constant, China's economic growth is actually becoming this kind of a dynamo, which will be, bring along, other countries to bring along their respective developments and also changes. As you mentioned, actually, electric vehicles have been, one of the China's key exports that have been selling very well, globally, showing to the world that actually the Chinese collaboration with the rest of the world can be, cementing a, important, ground on which economic recovery or even development could be taking off.
Global South position is to continue open our doors to everyone, and we have through that strategy has benefited in some ways from this geopolitical, great power economic rivalry. In the EV sector, for example, while the West will see this as overcapacity dumping of cheap EVs to the global market, Malaysia sees it as assisting our transition into the green economy.
Right.
You know, BYD and Chery, for example, has plans to build assembly plants for their EVs here in Malaysia that will generate jobs, and that will also generate technological transfer to us. We see this as a plus. And we continue to want to affirm that trade and sanctions is antithetical to global economic well-being, and we still want to maintain that we will trade with all.
Peter Qiang, Chen Hong, thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us. Thank you.